I'm Mike Uyak. I love to try new things, and I've had culinary adventures all around the world, as well as right at home. I've had really wonderful food, as well as some really horrible food. I'd like to share some of my adventures with you, and we'll see if I have what it takes to fix whatever goes wrong. This is Recipe Redemption. Hi, and welcome to a special gadget review edition of Recipe Redemption. In an effort to eat a little more healthfully and proportionally consume more vegetables, Chris and I decided to occasionally replace pasta with various vegetable noodles made by either julienning various vegetables or spiral cutting them. Being cheap, I bought the least expensive spiralizing cutter I could find. So here it is, and it's basically like a supersized version of those pencil sharpeners you got in your baggie of writing utensils when you were in elementary school. It's got two ends, one that makes the noodles, and one that with a straight blade that gives you about 1/8 inch thick slices. As you can see, it's a little awkward because where I want to put my fingers to get a better grip is exactly where the slices or strips come out. At any rate, you just shove your veggie of choice into the appropriate end and start twisting. It takes a few turns to really get started, but once you've shaved off enough to get a pencil-like point, you start to get long, more or less continuous strands. Now, let's look what happens when you try to spiral cut something a little larger, like this sweet potato. Unfortunately, if it doesn't fit into the opening of the cutter, it won't work, so I had to cut the sweet potato into smaller chunks. Unfortunately, when you shove something that isn't already a cylinder into this thing, you won't get continuous strands, like I did with the daikon radish earlier, but rather these shorter broken bits. So if you want longer noodles, you have to carve off the sides of the vegetable so it's as close to a cylinder as possible and less than the diameter of the opening of your spiral slicer. I suppose with the pieces you've cut off you could julienne them and still use them, but otherwise it's kind of unsatisfying. Also, because the blades are only on one side of the slicer, if you don't have a good sized cylinder, you're going to actually lean the vegetable toward that side or you won't get continuous ribbons, which kind of means you're not going to get continuous ribbons, because now your vegetable is off-center and wobbly. Just frustrating. Also, because the blades are exposed, I ended up with these big pointy chunks at the end, because I didn't want to get my fingers down where they could get cut to ribbons, and now I have this awkward shape that's hard to cut up into anything useful. You can't jam a fork into the end of your veggie and try to turn it that way either, because the fork ends up running against the blades as well, which I'm sure shortens their life expectancy. And let's be honest, I'm getting older. My hands are kind of arthritic, and this ends up being physically a lot more work than you'd expect, and just generally an unpleasant job to perform, even though eventually I'm going to eat the end product. I'd prefer if there was a gadget that actually made this job easier, not harder. And there are. There's one that I found that attaches to my stand mixer and uses the mixer's electric motor to do all the work. Just drop your veggies in and out come lovely spirals. However, it's $70 retail, and it gives me a case of kitchen myopathy. I just can't see myself spending that much on a gadget to make zoodles. So I went shopping and found a spiral slicer I thought would be good for around $13. But then the post office lost it. So I got a refund and found another one and ordered that for around $15. And the day after it arrived, the first one reappeared. About 3 weeks late. So now I have 3 spiral slicers, which is a little annoying, but it allows me to do a side-by-side comparison. And here we go. I'm not naming brand names because I'm not endorsing or sponsored by any of these brands, but I'm sure you can find them online if you really care. This one has an upper and lower compartment, and it seems designed specifically with safety in mind. The top has the crank with a plunger that feeds the veggies into the blades in the middle. Both the spiral blades, which has 3 different widths on this, and the final slicing blade can be rotated to a safe position using these little dial switches on the side, so that they're inaccessible by your fingers both on top and bottom when not in use. But it is possible to forget they're in the stowed position when you go to use them, and the slicer might not actually slice as a result, so you have to keep that in mind. The lower container is about a 5-cup capacity, which is decent for this type of gadget. The upper compartment apparently can only hold about a 4-inch tall vegetable, so you'll still have to cut larger items down to size. You still have to lean a little to keep the whole thing steady while slicing, but it seems to do a decent job, though the spiked grabber end of the crank and plunger seems to need a lot of material to get a good grip on your vegetable, so the wider the top of the vegetable is, the better. Otherwise, the blades could bite in and grab the vegetable and cause the plunger to simply spin and dig furrows in your food rather than actually rotating it. Also, if you push down on the crank too hard, it can actually cause the vegetable to feed just slightly lower into the final cutting blade than it did going through the spiral blades, leading to almost solid slices with perforations that you actually have to peel apart to get the desired noodle shape, which is a little annoying. I found this only happened as you got to the end for some reason. The other slicer has a slightly different design. The crank handle mounts to a sliding bracket that locks onto the body of the unit and back, but with a flip of a switch can be removed for ease of cleaning. The cutting blades are more exposed, so is slightly less safe than the other one, but this open design makes it seem as though it can handle slightly wider vegetables if necessary. There are 2 noodle widths available, plus a flat surface if you want wide slices. The lower compartment is a good bit smaller than the other unit, perhaps 2 cups in volume, so you'll have to empty it more often if you're going through a lot of veggies. The part I like is this lever here on the side, which locks the whole thing down to your countertop. There's a suction cup on the bottom, so you don't have to worry about keeping it all steady while you're slicing. Again, if you push down too hard, you get perforated slices instead of nice noodly ribbons, which is less than ideal. For fun, I threw a whole onion into the slicers, and after a bit of finagling, managed to make these nice shoestrings out of it. Great for things like onion soup, or for making your own French fried onions for topping that Thanksgiving green bean casserole. I'm pretty sure you could throw hunks of cabbage in there and slice them into a nice slaw, so this is definitely not a unitasker. You just have to use your imagination. So what have we learned? Well, when you're buying a new piece of gear for your kitchen, you have several things you need to keep in mind before laying down your hard-earned money for it. 1. Do you actually need this thing? The answer in many, many cases is no. All these flashy gadgets that often do a task that can be accomplished with perhaps a tiny bit more effort by using basic kitchen gear you already have. Something that slices and dices things is performing a function that often can just be accomplished with a good 10-inch kitchen knife. But occasionally, the cuts you want are really, really fiddly with a knife, like long, thin, noodle-like shapes. And this makes it go 20 times faster and is worth having. But, number 2, how often will you use the gadget? If it makes the job much easier, but you're probably going to use it once a year, or maybe less, is it really necessary to own? Number 3, look at the features. I'm still a little torn between the two crank slicers I bought because they both have pluses and minuses, as we've already gone through. But I'm certain that the pencil sharpener one is going in the thrift store box because it's too much work and it's just plain frustrating unless I want to practice my swearing. Number 4, how easy is it to use, clean, and store? If it's a pain to clean, you're less inclined to actually use it, which negates the reason for buying it in the first place. Storage is a big deal for me because I don't really have a whole lot of it. So before my house becomes even more cluttered than it already is with junk that I've bought, I need to think about where this new gadget is going to live when I'm not using it. Pro tip here, having everything you own on the kitchen counter at all times is not the answer. And number 5, cost. Now, why is this one last? Because sometimes it's worth getting something expensive if it's worth it to you. If you're going to use the heck out of it and enjoy every minute, then maybe the money isn't the point. Obviously, it needs to be within your means, but if it's really going to make life easier for having it, then maybe the extra money is worth it because it has bonus features that make it demonstrably, measurably, appreciably better than a cheaper model. Remember, quality counts for something too. If the gadget is solidly built and it'll last forever, and if it's satisfying all the other criteria, it might be worth paying extra over the cheaply built unit that breaks after 3 uses. So that's my quasi-review of 3 different spiral slicers. Oh, what did I do with all the daikon and sweet potato that I sliced up? Glad you asked. I heated some chicken stock to a simmer and added minced garlic and ginger. To that I added a liberal shot of dark soy, rice wine vinegar, and fish sauce with some cilantro. Then added some cubed chicken breast, a whole mess of spiral cut daikon and sweet potato, and a bunch of chopped bok choy, and let it all simmer for about 10 minutes. In the end, I scooped out a healthy portion of the solid bits and ladled on some of the broth for what I've taken to calling phi phi pho pho, a quick and simple midweek substitute for Vietnamese pho that is low on net carbs because of the noodle substitution, but with a decent amount of protein and lots of fiber and vitamin-rich veggies. Is it as good as real pho? Of course not. But it's pretty good. It's quicker and healthier for the substitutions. I've also done it with sliced beef, and that's quite good as well. Obviously, you use beef stock instead of chicken stock. So what do you think? Please comment down below with what you think about when buying new kitchen gadgets for yourself, or how do you achieve nice long spiral vegetables if you don't use any of the gadgets I tried out today, or how can I improve my faux pho recipe, or maybe what gadget you think I should demonstrate next. Until next time, I'm Mike Uyak, and thanks for watching Recipe Redemption. Bye now.